Dear Julia, everyone rejoices at the idea of leaving Corpus Christi. It is to be hoped that our troops being so close on the borders of Mexico will bring about a speedy settlement of the boundary question. I think the chances of a fight are about equal to the chances for peace. Ulysses Grant.
On the 8th of March, 1846, with the dragoons and Major Ringgold's flying artillery leading the way, the U.S. Army crossed the Nueces River, heading south.
Fighting times have come at last. Freedom buckle on the sword, crush the Mexican bow, then march.
With the failure of the Slidell mission, Polk had ordered Taylor to take a position on the Rio Grande, called the Rio Bravo by the Mexicans, opposite the town of Matamoros. The decision was certain to anger Mexico further. Mexico had claimed the Nueces River as its border with Texas, but Polk had adopted Texas' claim that the border was at the Rio Grande. When Taylor crossed the Nueces, he was crossing into disputed territory.
He was in territory that Mexico claimed legitimately as part of its own land. And if he went down as far as the Rio Bravo and crossed it, then he would be in territory that wasn't even in dispute. It was Mexican territory.
In late March, the first of Zachary Taylor's soldiers reached the north bank of the Rio Grande. Across the river in Matamoros, a crowd of Mexican soldiers and civilians watched as the U.S. troops rigged a flagpole and ran up the Stars and Stripes.
The soldiers of the Army of the North were angered by the enemy's insult. For the first time, that flag waved proudly before our forces, as if taking possession of what rightfully belonged to us. José María Iglesias.
The U.S. troops set to work building an earthen and wood fort they called Fort Texas. And for 3 weeks, tensions mounted as the U.S. and Mexican armies faced each other across the Rio Grande.
We are prepared for attack at any moment, often sleep in our clothes. Both sides appear to be always on the alert. We heard the Mexican horns and bugles across the river, blowing all night. Lieutenant Napoleon Dana.
As more Mexican troops gathered in Matamoros, some European observers predicted a quick Mexican victory. Mexico's regular army was 3 times as large as that of the United States. But the ranks were filled with inexperienced troops, peasants and Indians pressed into service through what were called quotas de sangre, quotas of blood. The army did have its elite, among them handsomely uniformed lancers, whose skill on horseback was matched by their courage. But the army lacked a corps of well-trained officers, and Mexican military tactics had not changed since the days of the Spaniards. On April 24th, the stalemate on the Rio Grande was broken when fresh troops led by General Mariano Arista arrived in Matamoros. That same day, Arista sent 1,600 soldiers across the Rio Grande. At Rancho de Caracitos, about 20 miles from Fort Texas, the Mexican soldiers surprised a U.S. scouting party.
Fuego!
The attack killed 14 U.S. soldiers and wounded 7. The rest were taken prisoner. The skirmish at Rancho de Caracitos was over in minutes. But as far as Zachary Taylor was now concerned, the United States was at war. The general sent a dispatch to Army headquarters in Washington.
April 26, 1846. Hostilities may now be considered as commenced, and I have this day deemed it necessary to prosecute the war with energy and carry it, as it should be, into the enemy's country. General Zachary Taylor.
Taylor knew he was in a dangerous position. His supplies were on the coast at Point Isabel, The army's survival depended on protecting them. The generals set out for Point Isabel with 2,000 soldiers, leaving 500 troops to defend Fort Texas, with orders to fight to the last man. The Mexican artillery in Matamoros rained a continual barrage on Fort Texas. The shelling could be heard all the way to Point Isabel. Lieutenant Ulysses Grant remembered the dreadful sound.
As we lay upon the seashore, the artillery at the fort could be distinctly heard. The war had begun. What General Taylor's feelings were, I do not know, but for myself, a young second lieutenant who had never heard a hostile gun before, I felt sorry that I had enlisted.
Taylor's men quickly loaded their supplies into 200 wagons and began the march back to Fort Texas. On the afternoon of May 8th, they found General Arista's army waiting for them. A line of nearly 4,000 Mexican soldiers, infantry, cavalry, and artillery, stretched a mile across a wide plain of tall, sharp grass and cactus. The Battle of Palo Alto began with the roar of cannon fire and quickly turned into an artillery duel. The soldiers of Major Ringgold's flying artillery used their skills to deadly effect. Advancing their batteries at full gallop, they could unlimber, fire, remount, and whirl off to a new position with astonishing speed. Time after time, Ringgold's units raked the Mexican lines, slashing their ranks with a rain of hot iron.
The American artillery ravaged the Mexican ranks horribly. The troops, frustrated by the needless deaths, cried out for permission to attack the enemy at bayonet's point and die as brave men should. José María Iglesias.
But Arista's officers ordered the Mexican troops to hold their position. This they did, at the cost of many lives. As Ringgold advanced yet again on the Mexican lines, a cannonball ripped through both his thighs. The wound was horrible, and the major lingered for 3 days before he died. When evening fell, the Mexican troops withdrew to reorganize, while the U.S. soldiers passed the night on the battlefield. The weary men slept through the groans and screams of the wounded from both sides. The surgeon saw, said one, was going the livelong night.